There is a unique and profound solitude that can only be found on a long, empty road at night. The world shrinks to the twin beams of your headlights, cutting a tunnel through the darkness. The hum of the engine becomes a constant, comforting companion. The radio, perhaps playing softly, is the only other voice for miles. In these moments, the car is more than a machine. It is a bubble of safety, a mobile sanctuary carrying you from one point of light to another across a vast and indifferent landscape. It represents freedom, control, the simple act of moving forward. But there is a chilling duality to this solitude. The very isolation that offers peace can, in an instant, become a source of profound vulnerability. When the engine sputters and dies, when a tire blows, or when the hypnotic rhythm of the road is shattered by the sudden, violent jolt of an impact, that sanctuary is breached. The darkness outside is no longer a passive backdrop, it becomes an active presence, vast and filled with unknown possibilities. The silence that follows a sudden stop is heavier, more absolute than the silence of motion. And it is in this terrifying transition from safety to peril, from motion to stillness, that some of the most haunting and perplexing unsolved disappearances are born. These are not simply stories of people who went missing. They are stories of people who vanished from the very bubble of safety that was supposed to protect them. Their cars, left behind like metallic tombstones on the side of a deserted highway, become the final, silent witnesses to a mystery. They are found with doors ajar, engines still warm, personal belongings scattered on the seats, but the driver is gone. Vanished as if plucked from the earth, leaving behind a scene that asks 1,000 questions and offers no easy answers. Tonight, we will travel down 3 of these lonely roads. We will sit in the driver's seat of 3 cars left behind. And we will try to piece together the final moments of 3 individuals whose journeys ended abruptly. Not with a destination, but with a question mark. These are not just cases. They are voids, gaps in the fabric of ordinary life that have puzzled investigators and haunted families for years. From the frigid highways of Montana to the dense forests of Washington, and the flat, dark farmlands of Minnesota, these are 3 stories of when the road didn't lead home. This is a deep dive into some of the most unsettling, mysterious cases in modern history, where the last known location of a human being was inside a vehicle they would never drive again. Our first story takes us to the vast, windswept landscapes of Big Sky Country, Montana, in the spring of 1985. It's a story about a young woman named Patricia, or Trish, as her friends and family called her. At 23 years old, Patricia Meehan was at a crossroads in her life, a point familiar to many of us. She was bright, described by those who knew her as vivacious and full of life, but also as someone who was grappling with the uncertainties of young adulthood. She had recently moved to Bozeman, Montana, to live with her sister, looking for a fresh start and a new direction. The day she disappeared, April 20th, 1985, began like any other Saturday, but an undercurrent of unease seemed to run through it. Trish was scheduled to work at a local greenhouse, but she called in sick. Later that day, she spoke with her father on the phone, a conversation that, in hindsight, would become a crucial piece of this puzzle. He recalled that she sounded distressed, her voice tinged with an anxiety he couldn't quite place. She spoke of feeling disoriented, of seeing things that weren't there. It was a conversation that left him deeply concerned for her well-being. That evening, the unease that had been simmering throughout the day appeared to boil over. Around 8:30 p.m., Trish was driving her 1973 Dodge Colt on a rural road near her home when she rear-ended another vehicle. The accident was minor, a fender bender with no serious injuries. The other driver, a man named Don, reported that Trish seemed agitated and strange. She was reluctant to exchange insurance information and seemed desperate to leave the scene. She told him, "I don't have time for this," a phrase that would later echo with chilling significance. After a brief, tense exchange, she got back in her car and sped away into the gathering twilight. A short while later, another driver, a woman, witnessed the same Dodge Colt driving erratically, swerving across the road. She watched as the car suddenly veered off the highway, went down a slight embankment, and crashed through a barbed wire fence before coming to a stop in a farmer's field. The witness, concerned, pulled over and approached the vehicle. She saw a lone female figure, whom we know to be Trish, get out of the car. The woman asked if she was okay, if she needed help. Trish's response was perplexing. She didn't seem injured or panicked in the way one might expect after a crash. Instead, she seemed distracted, almost ethereal. She looked up at the sky, at the vast, empty expanse of Montana and simply said, "They're after me," before turning and walking away from the car, away from the road and into the darkness of the open field. The witness, unsure of what to do, drove to a nearby house to call the police. When sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene, they found the Dodge Colt, its front end damaged, sitting silently in the field. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside the car was Trish's purse containing her driver's license and a small amount of cash. Her cigarettes were on the dashboard. Everything a person would need was there except for the person herself. The location where Trish's car was found is critical to understanding the mystery. It was near the intersection of Highway 287 and Duck Creek Road, just outside the town of Three Forks. This is not a dense forest or a treacherous mountain pass. It's open, rolling farmland, dotted with ravines and creeks, but largely exposed. The deputies began their search immediately, their flashlight beams cutting across the cold, dark fields. They called out her name, but only the sound of the wind answered. In the days that followed, one of the most extensive search operations in Montana's history was launched. Hundreds of volunteers, law enforcement officers, and professional search and rescue teams scoured the area. They used tracking dogs, helicopters, and planes with infrared sensors. They searched on foot and on horseback, covering a radius of several miles from the crash site. The search was methodical and exhaustive. They combed the fields, checked the ravines, and walked the banks of the nearby Madison River. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, not a single sign that Patricia Meehan had ever been there, apart from the car she left behind. The tracking dogs provided one of the few and most baffling clues. Several different dogs were brought to the scene. They all picked up Trish's scent at the abandoned car. They followed a clear trail leading away from the vehicle for about 100 yards, heading towards the highway. And then, abruptly, the trail stopped. It didn't fade out, it didn't become confused. It simply ended as if she had been lifted into the air. For the experienced dog handlers, it was a deeply unsettling moment. It suggested that Trish had either gotten into another vehicle on the highway or that something else, something inexplicable, had occurred right at that spot. As the search continued with no results, investigators began to look deeper into Trish's life and her state of mind. The conversation with her father and her strange behavior at both accident scenes pointed towards a possible mental health crisis. Was it possible that she was experiencing some form of psychosis or a paranoid episode? This theory would explain her erratic driving and her cryptic statement, "They're after me." If this were the case, it's conceivable that, in her disoriented state, she wandered off into the vast, cold Montana night and succumbed to the elements. The nights in April can be brutally cold, and without proper gear, hypothermia would set in quickly. But this theory has its problems. If she had perished in the nearby landscape, it seems almost certain that some trace of her would have been found. The search was too thorough, the terrain too open. Her body, or at least some piece of clothing, should have turned up. Furthermore, the behavior of the tracking dogs, with the scent trail ending so suddenly, strongly contradicts the idea of her simply wandering off on foot. This leads to the second major theory: foul play. Did Trish's minor car accident have more sinister implications than it appeared? Was the other driver involved? Police investigated this angle thoroughly, but found no evidence to suggest he had anything to do with her disappearance. A more plausible foul play scenario is that after walking away from her crashed car, disoriented and vulnerable, she encountered someone on the highway. A stranger, perhaps noticing her distress, could have offered her a ride. This person could have been a good Samaritan, or they could have been a predator who saw an opportunity. This would explain why the scent trail ended at the road. She got into another vehicle. What happened after that is a matter of grim speculation. Was she abducted and murdered, her body disposed of somewhere far from the search area? This remains a strong possibility and is a cornerstone of this enduring true crime puzzle. There is also the witness from the first accident, Don. He had mentioned that after Trish sped away, he had followed her for a short distance, trying to get her license plate number. Could his presence have frightened her further, exacerbating her paranoid state and contributing to her second crash? It's possible, though there is no indication he ever caught up to her or had any further interaction. A third, less likely theory is that of a planned, voluntary disappearance. Could Trish have orchestrated the entire event to escape her life? Perhaps she was unhappy and the accidents were a dramatic way to stage her own vanishing. She could have had a Confederate waiting for her on the highway. While possible, this theory doesn't align well with the evidence. Why leave her purse and money behind? Why the genuine distress reported by her family and the witnesses? It seems too chaotic, too messy for a premeditated act. Years turned into decades. The case of Patricia Meehan grew cold, but it never faded away. For her family, the lack of answers is a wound that cannot heal. Her sister, who she had moved to Bozeman to live with, has spoken of the endless cycle of hope and despair. Every time human remains are found in Montana, there is a flicker of hope that they might finally have an answer, followed by the familiar pain when it turns out not to be Trish. The story of Patricia Meehan is a perfect storm of perplexing elements. We have a young woman in a state of apparent psychological distress, 2 car accidents in quick succession, a cryptic final statement, and a scent trail that vanishes into thin air. Did she fall victim to the harshness of the Montana wilderness, a victim of her own troubled mind? Or did she fall victim to a human predator, a chance encounter on a dark road that sealed her fate? The car in the field is the last known fact, the final period on a sentence that has no end. The rest is just silence and the ceaseless Montana wind blowing over an empty field, keeping its secrets. The search for this missing person officially remains open, a quiet file in a cabinet filled with questions. From the open plains of Montana, our journey now takes us 15 years forward in time and southwest to the dense, rain-soaked forests of Washington state. This is the story of Leah Roberts, a young woman whose disappearance is a tapestry woven with threads of grief, a quest for self-discovery, and a crash scene so bizarre it seems to defy all logical explanation. Leah was 24 years old in the spring of 2000. To understand her story, you must first understand the series of tragedies that had shaped her recent life. Within a few short years, she had lost both of her parents, her mother to chronic illness and her father to a sudden heart condition. On top of this immense grief, she herself had survived a serious car accident that left her with a steel rod in her femur. These events had a profound impact on her. She was a thoughtful, intelligent, and creative young woman, studying Spanish and sociology at North Carolina State University. But she was also adrift, searching for meaning in the wake of so much loss. She found a kindred spirit in the writings of Jack Kerouac, the iconic author of the Beat Generation who chronicled his own cross-country road trips in search of freedom and enlightenment. Leah began to dream of her own on-the-road adventure. She felt a pull to leave her life in Durham, North Carolina behind, if only for a while, and see the Pacific Northwest. She secretly planned her trip, telling her older sister, Kara, that she would be gone for a few weeks, but remaining vague on the details. On March 9, 2000, Leah put her plan into motion. She withdrew several $1,000s from her bank account, almost all of her savings. She packed her white 1993 Jeep Cherokee with her belongings, her beloved cat, Bee, and a few cherished items, including her guitar and, fittingly, a copy of Kerouac's book. She left a note for her roommate that has become a haunting artifact of the case. It read, in part, "I'm not suicidal. I'm the opposite. I'm heading west. See you in a couple weeks." With that, she drove away from everything she knew, heading towards a horizon she would never reach. For the next 9 days, Leah was a ghost on the American highway system. We know she was traveling because of a series of credit card transactions, a gas station in Tennessee, a motel in Oregon. But her journey was largely a solo affair, a private pilgrimage. The last confirmed sighting of her alive was on March 13th at a gas station near the Oregon-Washington border. A security camera captured a grainy image of her inside the store. She appeared to be alone and calm. 5 days later, on March 18th, a couple out for a jog made a shocking discovery. Down a steep, wooded embankment off Canyon Creek Road, a remote logging road in Whatcom County, Washington, they saw the wreckage of a white Jeep Cherokee. It was Leah's vehicle. When police arrived and began to process the scene, they realized this was no ordinary car accident. The scene was less like the chaotic aftermath of a crash and more like a carefully constructed, almost theatrical, diorama of a disaster. The Jeep had apparently rolled multiple times down the embankment, sustaining heavy damage. But the way it had been staged was deeply strange. Blankets and clothing had been hung up inside the windows, blocking the view from the outside, almost like makeshift curtains. This suggested someone had been living in or using the crashed vehicle as a shelter after the accident. Inside the Jeep, the mystery deepened. Leah's wallet was found, containing over $2,500 in cash. Her driver's license, checkbook, and credit cards were all there. Her expensive guitar and CDs were undisturbed. A box of cat food was found, along with her cat carrier. But her cat, B, was gone. Most chillingly, tucked away in the Jeep was her mother's engagement ring, a precious heirloom she had chosen to take with her on this journey. The scene posed an immediate and baffling contradiction. A person in a serious car accident in a remote location would almost certainly take their money and identification with them when they left to seek help. A robber would have taken the cash and valuables. But here, everything of monetary value was left behind. It was as if the material world no longer mattered. The only things missing were Leah, her cat, and the keys to the Jeep. Investigators from the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office began to analyze the crash itself, and the more they looked, the stranger it became. Evidence at the top of the embankment suggested the Jeep had been traveling at a significant speed before it went over the edge. However, an examination of the vehicle's mechanics revealed something that didn't add up. A wire had been cut to the starter relay, which would allow the car to accelerate rapidly without the need to depress the gas pedal. This pointed towards a deliberate act. It looked as though someone had intentionally sent the car careening down the embankment. But why? And was Leah inside it when it crashed? The lack of any blood or other forensic evidence inside the vehicle to suggest she had been seriously injured in the rollover led many to believe she was not. So, what happened? The leading theory held by law enforcement is that Leah was met with foul play. Perhaps she had reached her destination, the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and was exploring the area. She may have met someone on her travels, a fellow wanderer or a local who seemed friendly at first. This person could have attacked her, killed her, and then staged the crash to cover their tracks, hoping the remote location and the appearance of an accident would prevent a serious investigation. The blankets in the windows could have been used to conceal her body while the killer transported it from the scene. This theory gained significant traction due to a few crucial pieces of information that emerged later. A witness came forward claiming to have seen Leah at a gas station in Bellingham, Washington, a few days before her Jeep was found. The witness said she was with a man and that she seemed dazed and disoriented. The man was described as agitated and aggressive. He was later identified as a mechanic from a nearby town with a history of military service and a known temper. When police questioned him, he denied ever meeting Leah, and without more evidence, they could not pursue him as a primary suspect. His identity has been kept private, but he remains a person of interest in this ongoing mysterious case. Then came another clue, even more unsettling. A man walking the same remote road shortly after the crash discovered something odd. He found a Ticketmaster stub for a concert in Seattle. Later, he heard about Leah's disappearance and realized the potential significance. He remembered that near where he found the ticket, he had also heard a man screaming in the woods. Frightened, he had left the area quickly. And then, perhaps the most disturbing clue of all. Weeks after her disappearance, a man called the Bellingham Police Department with what he claimed was a tip. He spoke frantically, claiming that his wife had seen Leah after the crash. He said Leah had visited a diner, left, and gotten into a pickup truck with an unknown man. He provided specific details about Leah's life that were not public knowledge, such as the steel rod in her leg and the fact she had been visiting the Kerouac locations. Then he claimed his wife had found Leah's body, but he hung up before providing any more information. The call was traced to a payphone, and the man was never identified. Was it a cruel prank or a genuine witness too afraid to come forward? Or was it the killer himself playing a twisted game with the police? Let's unpack the theories. The first and most widely accepted is the foul play theory we've discussed. Leah met a predator who killed her and staged the crash. The man at the gas station, the screaming in the woods, the strange phone call, they all point in this direction. A second theory suggests a voluntary disappearance that went wrong. Perhaps Leah, in her quest to disconnect from her old life, intentionally crashed her car. Maybe she planned to live off the grid in the forest. The blankets in the windows could have been for shelter. But if so, what happened to her? Did she become lost or injured and perish in the vast wilderness? This seems plausible, but it doesn't explain the cut starter wire, the witness at the gas station, or the strange phone call. And where is her cat, B? A cat was reportedly seen near the crash site weeks later, suggesting it might have survived and been living wild. A third, darker possibility combines these elements. Perhaps Leah did meet someone. Maybe they were traveling with her. Maybe they were the one who crashed the car, either with or without Leah inside. Perhaps she survived, but was injured and disoriented, and wandered away. Or perhaps her companion turned on her after the accident. The case of Leah Roberts is a labyrinth of contradictions. A young woman seeking solitude and freedom who may have found violence and death. A crash scene that looks both accidental and deliberate. Valuables left behind, but a life taken. It's a true crime story that feels like a novel, full of symbolism and foreshadowing the Kerouac book, The Quest for a New Life, the journey west that ended in a dark, wooded ravine. Her sister, Kara, has become a tireless advocate for her case, keeping her story alive, hoping that one day a piece of evidence will surface, a witness will find their courage, and the mystery of what happened on that lonely logging road will finally be solved. For now, Leah Roberts remains a ghost, her story a haunting echo in the Washington woods. Our final story tonight is, in many ways, the most chilling of all. It lacks the potential for paranormal speculation or grand conspiracy. Its horror lies in its stark, terrifying simplicity and in the fact that we have an audio recording of a young man's final moments before he vanished from the face of the earth. We travel to the cold, flat landscape of southwestern Minnesota on a frigid night in May of 2008. This is the story of Brandon Swanson. Brandon was a 19-year-old student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. On the evening of May 14, 2008, he was doing what countless college students do at the end of a semester, celebrating. He attended a party at a friend's house in Canby, Minnesota, and then drove to another friend's house in the nearby town of Lind. The drive between these towns is through quintessential rural Minnesota grid of gravel roads, vast fields of corn and soybeans, and very few landmarks. It's the kind of place where, at night, the darkness is absolute. Sometime after midnight, Brandon left the party in Lind to drive home to Marshall, a trip of about 30 miles. This is where his night took a wrong turn, literally. While driving on a gravel road, he managed to get his car, a green Chevrolet Lumina, stuck in a ditch. He was uninjured, but the car was immobilized. At 1:54 a.m., he did what any of us would do. He called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, for help. And so began a phone call that would last for 47 minutes, a desperate, confusing, and ultimately terrifying conversation that is the centerpiece of this entire mystery. Brandon told his parents he had crashed his car and was not hurt. He said he was okay, just stuck. He tried to describe his location, telling them he was somewhere near Lind. His parents, Brian and Annette, immediately got in their car and drove out to find him, staying on the phone with him the entire time. The problem was they couldn't find him. They drove to the area Brandon described, but there was no sign of his car. Brian and Brandon tried to guide each other, flashing their headlights, honking their horns, shouting into the night. Nothing. The flat landscape should have made it easy to spot headlights for miles, but they saw nothing, and he saw nothing of theirs. Brandon was becoming increasingly frustrated and cold. He told his parents he could see lights from a town which he believed to be Lind and decided he would start walking towards them. He told them to meet him at a local bar in Lind. He stayed on the phone with his father as he walked. He described his surroundings. He was walking along a gravel road. He passed some fences. He could hear water nearby. He seemed to be cutting through fields to take a more direct route to the lights he saw. His father tried to keep him on the line, to keep him talking, to keep his spirits up. They talked about everyday things, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in a situation that was becoming increasingly strange. And then, 47 minutes into the call, at 2:41 a.m., Brandon Swanson's voice suddenly changed. He let out a sharp, sudden exclamation. "Oh, SHT," he said. And then the line went dead. Silence. Brian tried calling him back immediately. Again and again. The calls went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. Brian and Annette continued to search frantically for their son throughout the night, but found no trace of him or his car. As the sun rose on May 15th, they called the police to report their son as a missing person. The initial police response was, unfortunately, hampered by the belief that Brandon was just a typical 19-year-old who had been out late and would turn up eventually. But as the day wore on and he didn't appear, the search began in earnest. And it was then that the central, baffling discrepancy of the case was discovered. Using cell phone tower data, authorities were able to pinpoint the general location of Brandon's car. It was not near Lind, as Brandon had insisted. It was found over 25 miles away, near the town of Porter, in a completely different county. His green Lumina was high-centered on the edge of a field approach, stuck in a ditch off a gravel road, exactly as he had described. But his perception of his location had been profoundly, inexplicably wrong. This discovery changed everything. It meant that when Brandon told his parents he was walking towards the lights of Lind, he was actually walking in a completely different direction, towards the lights of some other town, possibly Taunton or Porter. It meant his parents had been searching in the wrong place all along. And it meant that Brandon was lost in an area of farmland and fields far from where anyone thought he was. The search now focused on this new area. It was a massive undertaking involving multiple law enforcement agencies, hundreds of volunteers, and specialized search teams. They brought in tracking dogs. One dog picked up Brandon's scent from the car and followed a trail for 3.5 miles. The trail led through fields, along gravel roads, and followed the bank of a river that snaked through the landscape, the Yellow Medicine River. The trail was erratic, suggesting Brandon was not following a straight path, perhaps cutting through difficult terrain in the dark. The trail led directly to the edge of the river, and then it stopped. This is the basis for the most widely accepted theory in the Brandon Swanson case, accidental death by drowning. In this scenario, Brandon, disoriented and cold, was walking through the darkness, following lights he misidentified. He was on the phone with his father, perhaps not paying full attention to the terrain right in front of him. He likely didn't realize how close he was to the Yellow Medicine River. The OSHT could have been his final, shocked realization as he stumbled, lost his footing on the steep, muddy riverbank, and fell into the cold, fast-moving water. The river was high that spring due to recent rains. In the dark, weighed down by his clothing, he would have been quickly swept away. His phone would have been submerged, ending the call. His body may have been carried miles downstream, perhaps becoming trapped underwater by debris, which would explain why it has never been found despite extensive searches of the river. This theory is logical, consistent with the evidence of the dog tracking trail, and provides a plausible explanation for his sudden disappearance and the abrupt end of the phone call. It is the theory his parents have come to believe, and it is the reason why a Minnesota law called Brandon's Law was passed. It requires police to begin an investigation of a missing adult immediately, without a waiting period, recognizing that in cases like Brandon's, every minute counts. But as with any unsolved disappearance, other theories persist. The foul play theory is harder to support here, but not impossible. Could Brandon's OSHT have been a reaction to encountering another person? Perhaps he stumbled upon something illegal happening in the remote fields, a drug deal, poaching, anything. His sudden appearance could have led to a violent confrontation. But this theory lacks any evidence. There were no signs of a struggle near the car or along the scent trail. It seems unlikely, though it cannot be entirely dismissed. What about the disorientation? Why was Brandon so convinced he was 25 miles from his actual location? He had consumed some alcohol at the parties, but his parents said he didn't sound heavily intoxicated on the phone, just frustrated and cold. Could he have suffered a minor head injury when his car went into the ditch, one that affected his sense of direction but left him lucid enough to carry on a 47-minute conversation? It's possible. The landscape itself is disorienting at night, a grid of identical-looking roads and fields that can easily confuse even a sober local. The case of Brandon Swanson is a uniquely modern tragedy. It is a story defined by technology: the car that failed him, the cell phone that was his only lifeline, and the tower data that ultimately located his last known position. The 47-minute phone call is a haunting document, a real-time record of a life slowly slipping into a mystery. For his father, Brian, it is an unimaginable burden to have been the last person to speak to his son, to have heard his final words, and to be forever separated by a single, sharp intake of breath and a moment of sudden, terrible realization. The search for Brandon has never officially stopped. His parents continue to organize volunteer searches every year, walking the fields and riverbanks, hoping to one day bring their son home. But for now, the flat, dark land of southwestern Minnesota holds its silence, and the final moments of Brandon Swanson remain an echo on a dead line. 3 stories, 3 lonely roads, 3 cars left behind as silent monuments to an unsolved mystery. Patricia Meehan, walking into the Montana night, saying, "They're after me." Leah Roberts, on a quest for freedom in Washington, her journey ending in a staged crash full of contradictions. And Brandon Swanson, lost in the Minnesota darkness, his final word a curse before the silence took over. What connects these disparate lives separated by time and geography? It is the sudden, violent intrusion of the unknown into the ordinary. It is the fragility of our perceived safety. We travel these roads every day, cocooned in steel and glass, feeling a sense of control over our own small worlds. These stories serve as a stark reminder that just beyond the reach of our headlights lies a world that is vast, unpredictable, and sometimes incredibly dangerous. The cars they left behind are more than just evidence in a cold case file. They are potent symbols. They represent the life that was being lived right up until the moment it stopped. Trisha's purse and cigarettes. Leah's cash, guitar, and her mother's ring. Brandon's keys in the ignition. These are not the actions of people who plan to leave. They are the artifacts of an interrupted life. In each of these mysterious cases, we are left to grapple with the same spectrum of possibilities. Was it a simple, tragic accident of succumbing to the elements? Was it a voluntary choice, a desperate escape from a life that had become unbearable? Or was it the most terrifying possibility of all that in their moment of vulnerability they crossed paths with a human monster, a predator who saw an opportunity in the darkness? The work of investigators in these true crime cases is to sift through these possibilities, to follow the faint trails of evidence. But for us, for the listeners, the purpose of revisiting these stories is something different. It is an act of remembrance. It is to say their names aloud. Patricia, Leah, Brandon. It is to ensure they do not become forgotten statistics. By telling their stories, we keep the search alive, not just in the physical world, but in our collective consciousness. We honor the families who live every day with the agonizing pain of not knowing. If you have any information, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, about the disappearance of Patricia Meehan, Leah Roberts, or Brandon Swanson, please contact the relevant law enforcement agencies or the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS. You never know which piece of information might be the key that finally unlocks one of these heartbreaking puzzles. Thank you for joining me on this journey down these dark and lonely roads. The world is full of mysteries, and while we may never have all the answers, the search for them is what keeps hope alive. In the comments below, I would be interested to hear your thoughts. What theories about these cases resonate most with you? What small detail stands out? The conversation and the sharing of ideas are how we keep these stories from fading into the darkness from which they came. If you found value in exploring these unsolved disappearances with me, please consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the world's most compelling mysteries. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there.